Okay, we're going to continue on with our tissue microanatomy for Unit 2. And now we're going to talk about the different types of connective tissues that I want you to study for the Unit 2 anatomy test. And again, follow along with your Unit 2 anatomy study guide. I've got everything listed there for you that you need to know. I get my PowerPoint to wake up here. Here we go. All right, so just a little bit about connective tissues. Again, I'm not gonna go into a lot of detail here on the anatomy portion, since much of this is covered on the physiology side. But the connective tissues, just to kind of hit some highlights here, most abundant, widely distributed tissue type in the body, and they're also the most diverse type of tissue within the body. They occupy a lot of the spaces within the body. They provide, your bones are a type of connective tissue, so they provide you with support and a framework. And in fact, there are 4 different classes of connective tissues. The two that we'll cover the most here in Unit 2 are called connective tissue proper, and there are several different subtypes of that, actually. And then there are the cartilages. There actually are 3 different subtypes of cartilage. I'm only going to expect you to recognize one of those, though, for the anatomy test. Bone tissue is a type of connective tissue. And then blood is also a type of connective tissue. Believe it or not, your blood, even though it has a liquid consistency, is considered to be a type of tissue. So you can see just by that, just by seeing bone versus blood on there, that should make it clear to you that these connective tissues are very diverse. All right, so what we're going to do, we're mainly going to focus in on the connective tissues proper, which are kind of like your prototype connective tissues. These are very abundant within the body. And here's a little diagram here from your textbook, and this is actually a diagram of a type of connective tissue called areolar loose connective tissue. And we'll talk more about what that means shortly. The main reason I've got this little image up here is because I just want to show you what's going on in a typical proper type of connective tissue proper. So tissues have cells in them, and then you've also got extracellular matrix. So that's going to be the filler spaces in between your cells. The extracellular matrix consists of fluid, tissue fluid, or interstitial fluid, if you remember that from Chapter 3 in Unit 1. Then you've got lots and lots of solutes, dissolved substances in there. And within the extracellular matrix, you also have different types of protein fibers in there that help give these connective tissues many of their special properties. So let's take a look at the cells first that are within the tissue. All right, the one I really want to highlight for you especially is this one. There's its nucleus. That is a fibroblast. You'll hear more about those on the physiology lecture. Those are your main workhorse cells in your connective tissues. They make most of the components that you see over here of the extracellular matrix. Another cell type in here, this one, this kind of spiky looking cell, is a, let me erase cells over here for a second. That is called a macrophage. Macrophages are kind of like the garbage cleaners of your body. They do phagocytosis, so they'll ingest things like bacteria that are trying to invade a tissue, or if your own damaged, worn out tissues, they'll do phagocytosis on those damaged or worn out cell parts and take them in, and then they use all those digestive enzymes in their lysosomes, remember those from Unit 1, to break down those types of things and recycle the components. All right, this cell that you see over here is called a mast cell. And what mast cells do is they monitor tissues for infection and damage. And if you do have an infection or some sort of wound injury, they'll send chemical signals over here to the blood. That's a blood vessel passing through there. And that calls in the troops to come in and help fight the infection and clean up the damage. So that's a mast cell. Let's see, you've got some other cell types on here. This one is a lymphocyte. A lymphocyte is a type of white blood cell. We'll just call it a white blood cell for now. And this is a neutrophil over here, which is also another type of white blood cell. Those help you fight infections. So if you had an infection in this particular tissue, the mast cells would send chemical signals into the blood to recruit those white blood cells to come in there and help you fight an infection that might be going on in this particular tissue. Let's see. Some other cells over here, these guys over here, those are fat cells, which are actually called adipocytes or adipocytes. That's the name for those. Cyte means cell, adipose, that's a term that refers to your fatty tissue. So those are some of the various cell types that you would see in many of your connective tissue proper. Let me wipe this off for a second. And let's see what else is going on in here. All right, let's talk about some of the things in your extracellular matrix. So all of the space in between the cells is filled up with extracellular matrix. Now you do have a blood vessel passing through here. That's a blood vessel, a tiny microscopic one, which is really going to be known as a capillary. A capillary is a microscopic blood vessel. Blood is passing through there. It's releasing oxygen gas and other solutes like glucose, sugars, and amino acids, releasing that into the extracellular matrix that you see there, the spaces in between your cells. And also the capillary takes up wastes. So all those cells in there in the tissue generate waste, and those have to be taken away by the capillary. So remember, your blood is a transporter, so it brings good things to your tissues and takes away the wastes. Transportation is its main role. All right, within your extracellular matrix, you have protein fibers. Now you'll have different amounts of them in different connective tissues, but you have three main types. So the big purple ones that you see on here are called collagen fibers or collagenous fibers. In yellow or orange, like right there, over here, the orange ones are elastic fibers. And in the blue ones you see on there that are kind of webby and forming a network, those are called reticular fibers. All right, and we'll talk more about the functions of those fibers in the physiology side. Collagen fibers help give your tissues, helps them resist pulling. That's called tensile strength. Elastic fibers help, they kind of function like the rubber bands of your tissues. They allow a tissue to rebound back to its original shape after it gets stretched. So both of those two types of fibers are very important for helping your tissues retain their consistency and making them tough. Reticular fibers are kind of like thinner collagen fibers, and then they're all networked together in a web-like fashion. Reticular means web. So you'll have different combinations of these various protein fibers that fill in these spaces in your connective tissues. All right, now what about everything else in there where it looks, oops, wrong thing. All the blue area in there, all the rest of the stuff where you don't have the protein fibers, all the blue stuff, that's going to be, it has kind of a weird name. It's called ground substance. And that contains water plus solutes plus, we'll say, kind of sticky organic molecules. We'll leave it at that for now. We'll talk more about that on the physiology side. So really that's your interstitial fluid there within what's called the ground substance. But there are, lots of solutes in there: oxygen gas, carbon dioxide waste that's being taken away, other wastes from the cells, amino acids, some types of proteins are in there. Um, you have special organic molecules that are protein sugar combinations that help hold water in the tissue and help glue the components together. You'll hear about those on the physiology side. All those things together are called the ground substance. I know that is kind of a really bizarre name, but that's what it's called, and it probably has more like a jelly-like consistency than a fluid consistency, if that makes sense. So those are some of the different components that you would see in a generic connective tissue proper. Now there are several different types of connective tissue proper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you look at and identify two types of loose connective tissue, areolar and adipose, and two types of dense connective tissue, dense regular and dense irregular, and we'll talk about those. And we'll also talk about loose versus dense and what that means. All right, so the first one, this is an example type of connective tissue proper. They're showing you over here where you would find these tissues in the body. You find it, see how they've got it highlighted right there and right there. That's a tendon and a ligament. That's where you find this particular type of tissue. This is a dense connective tissue. And it's dense because, all right, let's back up over here for a second. Let's back up 2 slides. All these fibers we were taking a look at, in here, if you have a dense connective tissue, it means there are a lot of those protein fibers, the collagenous, the elastic, the reticular, taking up space within that tissue. If you have a loose connective tissue, you still have them, you just don't have nearly as many, so you'll have more of the ground substance in the extracellular matrix when compared to the protein fibers. All right, so again, this is the one that we're looking at here is called a dense type of connective tissue. And then is it regular or is it irregular? Regular versus irregular refers to the orientation of all those protein fibers. So if you look over here on this tissue slice diagram, all this pink stuff you see here that's kind of waving up and down like that, all right, proteins take up that pink dye. So what you're really seeing there, most of that pink swirly stuff you see there going up and down in those waves, those are mostly collagenous fibers. You got some elastic fibers in there as well, but they're mostly the collagen fibers, and they're all oriented in parallel. So you have parallel fibers in the tissue. And collagenous fibers resist pulling. So in your tendons and your ligaments, tendons connect your muscles to bones, ligaments connect bones to each other, and you don't want those bones separating from each other. You don't want your muscles detaching from your bones easily, and so they are connected to those structures with dense, regular connective tissue. And so when you have forces pulling on tendons and ligaments, all those collagen fibers, all oriented in parallel, really give those tissues a lot of strength to resist that pulling. And we'll talk about some additional features of those tissues on the physiology side. Dense, regular connective tissue. Little purple spots in there. What did we say those were? Those are nuclei. And then what's your major on that last little diagram we were looking at? What did we say the major functioning cell type in a proper connective tissue would be? The cells that are making things like collagen fibers, elastic fibers, some of the other solutes that you would have in your extracellular matrix, those are called your fibroblasts. Your fibroblasts are the workhorse cells in these tissues. So you would have a fibroblast there, there's one there, Now we're really pointing to the nucleus. The cytoplasm is going to be around the nucleus, of course. The cytoplasm stains pink, and so do all those collagen fibers. And so it just kind of blends together when you're looking at it under the microscope. You can't really distinguish very easily where the cells are versus the collagen fibers. You kind of can if you look really closely at that picture from your textbook. All right, now this one, and they're showing you here that this particular type of tissue that we're looking at, you would find it as a covering around joints. Where two bones come together, you actually have a connective tissue covering around those joints to help hold the joints together. And this is an example of dense, irregular connective tissue. Another place where you would find this is in the skin, in the dermis layer of the skin, which we'll hear about a lot in Chapter 5. So dense, again, means you have lots of, pen's not coming on here. Here we go. You've got lots of fibers, mostly collagen. You've also got elastic fibers in there as well. But the fibers are not in parallel. They run in many different directions, like you see on here. So because of that, it's said to be irregular. So if you're looking at a connective tissue on an actual microscopic image of it, and you see all this pink stuff in here and it looks really swirly and like it's running in multiple directions, that's going to be a big clue you're looking at dense, irregular connective tissue. Dense, regular, it looks very clearly like all the pink stuff is just running in parallel together. Little purple spots you see on there, those are nuclei, again, of what was our main cell type? Fibroblasts. Within that tissue. Now in that first little diagram we went over, yes, you would find macrophages in there, you would find mast cells in there as well. So some of those purple spots we're looking at might be the nuclei of those types of cells. You just can't, with this type of image, you can't really distinguish between those cell types. All right, how about our next tissue diagram here? So those were the two types of dense connective tissues we wanted to take a look at. This is an example of a loose connective tissue, and this is called areolar. Loose connective tissue. All right, and where you would find this, what they're showing you here, this is actually transitional epithelium. Maybe that looks familiar from your epithelial tissue anatomy when we were going over that. And we always said underneath epithelial linings in the body, if you go deeper to there, in the particular organ or structure where you're located, you're going to find connective tissue underneath there, and that is almost always going to be a place where you would find areolar tissue, underlying epithelial tissues in the body. All right, so we said dense connective tissues means the extracellular matrix, the spaces between the cells, is jam-packed full of protein fibers like collagen and elastin. In a loose connective tissue, you have fewer fibers. So you have fewer fibers, you have more ground substance in place of the fibers. Fewer fibers, more ground substance. Dense connective, lots of fibers, less ground substance. Now on your diagram over here, the darker pink, those are your collagenous fibers in that particular tissue, and your purple ones on there are going to be elastic fibers, the thinner ones. Okay. Moving on. Another type of loose connective tissue, this actually falls under the loose category, and this is a type. This is called adipose tissue. This is your fatty tissue, and they're given an example location there in the textbook within the breasts, surrounding the mammary glands, the milk-producing glands there in the breast. You'd have fatty tissue surrounding that, and of course you've also got a lot of adipose tissue between your skin and the underlying muscles. And so if you zoomed in under the microscope and looked at fatty tissue, what you would find in there are a whole bunch of round cells. Each of those is called an adipocyte. This one's pretty easy to recognize because they just look like bubbles. So each of those is an adipocyte. The little dark spot is the nucleus. Nucleus, nucleus, nucleus. Nucleus in these cells is squeezed up at an edge of the cell, because basically the cell is just full of a bunch of inclusions, little membrane covered vesicles or packages that are full of fats. These are fat storage cells. When you need energy, those fats get broken down and sent through your tissue fluids and your bloodstream to other cells in the body to give them a source of nutrients. So those cells can get bigger as they store more fat, or they'll shrivel as the fats get used. It's considered to be a loose type of connective tissue because you don't have a lot of protein fibers in the spaces. So your spaces between these cells would be like over in here and over in here. All those areas between the fat cells, you would not find a lot of those collagen and elastic fibers in there. So this is considered to be a type of loose connective tissue. All right, so let's take a look at an example type of cartilage. This is the only type of cartilage we're going to take a look at. This is called hyaline cartilage. Oops, I don't want to write in a highlighter. Hyaline cartilage, and in the Chapter 4 Physiology, I'll discuss a couple of other types of cartilage there. So cartilage is a special type of connective tissue. It's different from your connective tissues proper. So we're finished talking about our examples of those, and now we're moving on to the cartilages. And cartilages are located, you guys know cartilage as gristle on chicken bones. If you eat chicken, that's hyaline cartilage. So you're going to find it at your joints where bones come together. The example that they're showing you here, you have cartilages attached to your ribs, between your ribs and the sternum, the breastbone. So it's almost like it's almost kind of like, well, I don't want to say it's like bone because it's really constructed differently from bone, but it does provide support and framework. The consistency, though, is more moist, has more moisture inside it, and you can press on it more easily than you could press on bony type tissues. So if you've ever felt gristle, you know what the consistency of hyaline cartilage is like. All right, so what are cartilages built from? They're actually kind of interesting because you might not think that that is a living active tissue, but it is. So right here, what you're seeing, these little things that look like eyes almost within the tissue, this is what it would look like under the microscope. All right, so those are little chambers called lacunae. Lacuna is singular, and if you add an E on it, it's plural. Those are the chambers. Oops. All right, and then inside the chambers, you actually have cells in the cartilage. Those are called chondrocytes. You guys remember C-H-O-N-D, chond for cartilage? We did the hypochondriac regions back in Chapter 1. That refers to cartilage. So cells in cartilage are called chondrocytes. So these are the cells that actually manufacture the components of the cartilage. So all this purple stuff you see here, it's not really purple, it's just taken up a purple dye that they use to prepare this tissue. That's your extracellular matrix of the cartilage tissue. And we'll talk more about the components of that on the physiology side. But so there are lots of different dissolved substances in there that give cartilage its consistency, and those chondrocytes are the cells that make that stuff. And so if a cartilage gets damaged, those cells have to make all that stuff that you have there in the extracellular matrix to repair the cartilage. So that's pretty recognizable, because that's the only tissue you guys have to look at for now where you would see these things that look like eyes, the little lacunae with the chondrocytes on the inside, and then the extracellular matrix looks kind of glassy, almost like purple glass on that, and so it makes that particular type of tissue pretty easy to recognize. All right, that's actually everything that you guys need to know for the Unit 2 anatomy test. Once you've completed the epithelial anatomy lecture and the connective anatomy lecture, that's all you need to know from Chapter 4 on tissues. And I'm going to do a separate video lecture on the microanatomy of the skin that you'll also need to know for the Unit 2 anatomy test.